in this lesson, wanted to talk a bit about some of the books that this training is based on. You'll be doing in this lesson the brain power audit. The brain power audit is good. It's not a scientific test, it's an audit, but it does a number of things. It enables you to go through a number of the subject issues that are important when you're developing your thinking skills, and enables you to give you some kind of subjective assessment of where you think you are right now. And later on at the end of the training or at some other time, you can do it again. But it's a good checklist. It's like doing inventory. That was designed by Eric Bienstock. Eric was the first chief instructor of the School of Thinking. He was actually the first instructor that I employed. The idea that I had back in 1979, when I discussed with Edward de Bono starting the School of Thinking, the idea was to not just train thinkers, but to train thinking instructors. And of course, that's the whole theme and purpose of this thinking instructors course that you're doing. We put our first ad in the New York Times. Logically at the time, I thought teachers would be interested. So I put an ad in the education section. I think it was called part-time thinking instructors required, apart from the fact that I got the telephone number wrong in the very first ad. And it was some lady in Harlem who kept getting all these numbers and got quite rude and angry after a while. But anyway, we had a second go the next week, and we had quite a big response. I conducted the first meeting for about 50 teachers in a hotel in Penn Station, and halfway through the meeting a fight broke out. Half the teachers were outraged at the suggestion that they weren't already doing everything that could possibly be done to teach kids to think, because the idea was to get thinking in the schools as a school subject. The other half was saying, look, about time, this is something we've always wanted, not just teaching kids what to think, but teaching them skills, how to think. So I ended the meeting because I didn't want to get involved in the fight. And I said, look, I'll start another meeting in 3 minutes, and if anyone is still interested in pursuing this, come to the next meeting. I left the room and fully feeling, of course, that nobody would be there. But to my surprise, about 50 people showed up to the second meeting, and Eric Bienstock was one of them. I think about 100 people showed up, and then 50 of them signed up for the first Thinking Instructors course. This was back in January of 1980. Eric, I think, was first, and so I appointed him as the first senior instructor, and we developed the rest of the program together. The test, now, the brain power audit is based on this book. This was the first instructor's manual that we put together when we started the School of Thinking. Edward de Bono and I wrote this book. It was based on some of Edward's court thinking lessons from the Cognitive Research Trust, and Eric developed the brain power audit from the lessons that are in this book, and that's the brain power audit that you'll do in today's lesson. This book did very well. It was 100,000 of them were printed and put into schools around America. It did help to kick off the whole idea of putting thinking into the schools in the United States. One of the big things that did it was that the Reader's Digest, back in April of 1983, did a cover story on this particular book. You can see here 7 Steps to Better Thinking. And in this book, they summarized 7 of the lessons, or 7 of the thinking strategies, rather in the Reader's Digest article, that were in the book. This is a huge publication in America. Now, the equivalent today would be like being on Oprah. So you can imagine if you're on Oprah, bingo, you're sort of a fad in America. Well, the Reader's Digest was the same in those days. And getting on the cover there, it turned the whole School of Thinking around. Radio, TV, media, we were bombarded. We then did a big cover story in the in the New York Times education section. Now, the Dean of Education Writers who wrote that section influenced pretty much what happened around America. And so you got the fad effect, the snowball effect, and the whole thing took off. So it was actually the write-up of this book in the Reader's Digest that triggered off I guess, the success of the School of Thinking. That summer it was interesting to travel around Europe and see in the French edition the same article was there, and even the German and the others, and also the Arabic edition. Now, this led to another interesting thing in terms of the history of the School of Thinking and the way thinking's been taught. In this article in the Reader's Digest about the Learn to Think course book, the artwork which the Reader's Digest did were these little thinking caps. There were 7 steps to better thinking here, and each one of these were illustrated by a little brain or a little head with a different coloured thinking cap on it. And not only was that in the in the English edition, but the same, even when you look going backwards, of course, in the Arabic edition, the same things were used. You see the version there in the Arabic edition. One colour there, different colours here. So we had the idea, what if we had thinking caps? What if we had different coloured thinking caps? Maybe, as it is in the magazine article here, a different cap for each type of thinking. Originally, the idea was a promotional thing for the School of Thinking, something, perhaps a giveaway, a little package we could sell. Edward de Bono liked the idea, decided we could either have thinking caps or thinking hats or thinking headbands, I think he had with the School of Thinking written on it, and eventually he developed the idea into a book which became his best-selling book, and now the thinking hats, the 6 thinking hats, is a program that's in many schools around Australia and businesses around the world, and he's described it as what he thinks is one of the most important thinking tools in 2,500 years. So these are what some of these lessons are based on, these ideas. Then further on, I then wrote Software for the Brain. This is back in the late 80s, early 90s, and there's been a number of editions here, a more recent edition and then international edition in the UK. And of course now the ebook that you're familiar with, that you bought online, the Software for the Brain, edition number 4, that's the book now, the central book that all of these lessons are based on.